first, I want to ask Deputy Director Inglis a question before we even go into the legality and usefulness of this. We had a huge security breach, I think we'll all agree, committed by Edward Snowden. And a few years ago, Bradley Manning downloaded hundreds of thousands of classified and sensitive documents, passed them on to WikiLeaks. Now, if two data breaches of this magnitude had occurred in the private sector, somebody would have been held accountable by now. There's a lot of material kept in the private sector, trade secrets and so on. If they allowed this kind of leaking to go on in most companies, somebody would be held accountable. Who at the NSA is taking responsibility for allowing this incredibly damaging security breach to occur?
So that accountability must be considered at least two levels. One, at the individual level, we have to take a hard look to see whether individuals exercise their responsibilities appropriately, whether they exercise due diligence in the exercise of those responsibilities.
Well, obviously, there wasn't. I mean, if a 29-year-old school dropout could come in and take out massive amounts of data, it's obvious there weren't adequate controls. Has anybody been fired?
No, sir, not yet.
Has anybody been admonished?
So those investigations are underway. When those investigations are complete, we will have a full accounting within the executive branch and to the Congress of individual and systemic accountability. I think that at the end of the day, we will have to look to see whether people exercise the responsibilities appropriately, whether they essentially exercise the trust that is accorded to them. In our system, we extend top secret SCI, special compartmented intelligence clearances to a range of people and expect that they will then exercise that trust as the American people intended. And we will make a full accounting of that.
I remember President Reagan made up a statement, which many of us use about trust but verify. I mean, don't you have, I realize you have to have a certain amount of trust, but don't you have people double checking what somebody's doing?
We do, sir.
Who double checked Mr. Snowden?
Well, there are checks at multiple levels. There are checks in terms of what an individual might be doing at any moment in time. They
obviously failed.
In this case, I think we can say that they failed, but we don't yet know where.
You think you can say they failed. I mean, he's sitting over at the airport in Russia with millions of items.
I would say that with the benefit of what we now know, they did fail.
Okay.
But we don't yet know where precisely they failed, and we may find that they failed at multiple points in the system, either in the exercise of individual responsibility or in the design of the system in the first place.
Has anybody been asked to resign or offered to resign because of this failure?
No one has offered to resign. Everyone is working hard to understand what happened and to put in place the necessary mechanisms.
How soon will we know who screwed up?
I think that we'll know over weeks and months precisely what happened and who should then be held accountable, and we will hold them accountable.
Are you taking any steps now to make sure such a screw-up doesn't happen again?
We are, sir. We have instituted a range of mechanisms, not simply one, to ensure that we would understand and immediately be able to catch someone who tried to repeat precisely what Mr. Snowden did. But we also have to be creative and thoughtful enough to understand that there are many other ways somebody might try to beat the system.
You can understand why some people use that old expression, locking the door after the horse has been stolen?
I can, sir.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate your candor. And I realize General Alexander is in Las Vegas, but I'll ask you this question. Last month, he promised to provide me with specific examples of terrorism cases where Section 215 phone records collections have been used. I was led to believe by his answer there were dozens of cases where Section 215 authorities have been critical to the discovery and disruption of terrorist plots. I've now reviewed all the classified material that the NSA sent. I'm far from convinced. The document is classified, but what was in open testimony is that Section 215 helped to thwart or prevent 54 terrorist plots. Not by any stretch can you get 54 terrorist plots. How many cases was Section 215 bulk phone records collection critical to preventing a terrorist plot?
Sir, I might answer in open session and then offer to provide follow-up details in a classified session. I would say that the administration has disclosed that there were 54 plots that were disrupted over the life of these two
And
programs.
Section 215 was critical to preventing
No, sir.
54 plots?
And of those plots, 13 of those had a homeland nexus. The others had essentially plots that would have come to fruition, Europe, Asia, other places around the world.
How many of those,
the 13,
how many of those 13 were plots to harm Americans?
Of the 13 that would have had a homeland nexus, 12 of those, 215 made a contribution. The question you've asked, though, is more precise in the sense of, is there a but-for case to be made, that but-for 215, those plots would have been disrupted? That's a very difficult question to answer in so much as that's not necessarily how these programs work. That's actually not how these programs work. What happens is that you essentially have a range of tools at your disposal. One or more of these tools might tip you to a plot. Others of these tools might then give you an exposure as to what the nature of that plot is. And finally, the exercise of multiple instruments of power, to include law enforcement power, ultimately completes the picture and allows you to interdict that plot. There is an example amongst those 13 that comes close to a but-for example, and that's the case of Basali Moalam.
I've read that. I've read the material on that. It'd be safe to say the target 54 but-fors.
It is safe to say that, sir.
That's
because
not right.
This capability, the 215 collection of metadata, is focused on the homeland. It's focused on detecting plots that cross the foreign to homeland domain.
But
And given that only 13
it
of
wasn't
those
a
plots,
but-for in 54 cases.
it was not, sir.
Thank you.
Given that only 13 of those plots had a homeland nexus, it therefore only had its principal opportunity to make a contribution in 13 or less. In fact, it made a contribution to a plot that was disrupted overseas. I think that shows that this actually is looking not simply at the homeland, but it's looking at the foreign homeland nexus.
And I hope we are not mixing up 215 with other sectors.
We try hard not to do that, sir. They are distinguished but complementary tools.
Mr. Chairman, if I might add some insight to the value of 215.
My time is up, but go ahead, and if that's okay with you.
Can't they make statements?
Go ahead, Mr. Joyce. No, they're just here to help. Go ahead, Mr. Joyce.
I just want to add, as you mentioned before, you know, how many dots do we need? And I think we need to frame this by understanding who the adversary is and what they're trying to do. And they're trying to harm America. They're trying to strike America. And what we need is we need all these tools. So you mentioned the value of 702 versus the value of business records 215. They are different. And I make the analogy like a baseball team. You have your most valuable player, but you also have the players that hit singles every day.
Mr. Joyce.
Now, I just want to relate to the homeland plots. So in Najibullah Zazi, in the plot to bomb the New York subway system, business record 215 played a role. It identifies specifically a number we did not previously know.
It was a critical role.
What I'm saying, what it plays
Wasn't
a
there some
different.
undercover work that took place in there?
Yes, there was some undercover work. But
And,
what I'm saying is each tool plays a different role, Mr. Chairman. I'm not saying that it is the most important tool.
Wasn't the FBI already aware of the individual in contact with Zazi?
Yes, we were, but we were not aware of that specific telephone number, which NSA provided us.
The only reason I go down this, you know, if we did everything, if we, for example, if we could have more security, if we strip searched everybody who came into every building in America, we're not going to do that. We have more security if we closed our borders completely to everybody, we're not going to do that. If we put a wiretap on everybody's cell phone in America, if we search everybody's home, but there are certain things, certain areas of our own privacy that we Americans expect. And at some point, you have to know where the balance is.